I never thought the people I trusted the most would drag me to a dark storage unit and lock me in a cage like an animal. Their cruel laughter echoed as they slammed the door shut, the sound of the padlock sealing my fate. The cold metal bars pressed against me as I realized how far their greed had gone. They believed their victory was sealed, but they had no idea what I had planned. The next moment shattered their illusion, and what happened to them afterward was truly shocking. My name is Isabella, and for most of my life, I was just an ordinary woman with simple dreams. At 28, I worked as a school teacher in Chicago, spending my days surrounded by the chatter of children and my evenings in a small, cozy apartment. My life was quiet, perhaps even unremarkable, but I was content. I had grown up in a modest family that valued hard work and independence. My parents had taught me the importance of standing on my own feet, and I had built a life for myself that reflected those values. I wasn't the type to dream of luxury or grandeur. Happiness, to me, was about stability and peace. I didn't know then that my life was about to take a turn I could never have imagined, a turn that would test everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and courage. I met Daniel when I was 26. It was at a friend's barbecue party on a sunny Saturday afternoon. I remember noticing him the moment he walked in, tall, with an easy smile and a charm that made everyone gravitate toward him. We struck up a conversation near the grill, and it didn't take long for me to feel drawn to him. He worked as a car salesman, and while he admitted that his job wasn't glamorous, he spoke about his dreams of doing something bigger, something better. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and I started seeing each other regularly. He had a way of making me feel special, like I was the only person in the room when he looked at me. He brought me flowers, wrote me little notes, and always found ways to make me laugh. For someone like me, who had always lived a simple life, Daniel felt like a whirlwind of excitement and possibility. Within a year, we were married. Our wedding was small and intimate, just close friends and family. We moved into a small apartment in Chicago and began building a life together. Daniel's job as a car salesman wasn't always steady, but I supported him, believing that we were a team. We didn't have much, but I was happy, or at least I thought I was. From the moment I met Gianna, Daniel's mother, I knew she didn't like me. She hid her disapproval behind a thin veneer of politeness, but her passive-aggressive comments always found their mark. At our first family dinner, she asked, "So, Isabella, do you cook as well as your mother did? Daniel deserves a good meal after a long day." Her tone was sweet, but the underlying jab was unmistakable. Over time, her remarks became bolder. If I had chosen a wife for Daniel, she said one evening, she would have been someone who brought more to the table, maybe someone with a more lucrative job. It stung, but I tried not to let it show. I thought that being patient and polite would eventually win her over. But Gianna wasn't interested in building a relationship with me. Instead, she seemed to delight in making me feel inadequate. Daniel, to my dismay, rarely defended me. "That's just how she is," he'd say with a shrug whenever I brought it up. "Don't take it personally." Her presence in our lives was constant. She dropped by unannounced, rearranged things in our apartment, and offered unsolicited advice about everything, from how I decorated to how I should be supporting Daniel's career. "A wife's duty," she'd say with a knowing smile, "is to make her husband's life easier." I tried to ignore her, to focus on my own life and my marriage, but her words planted seeds of doubt. Was I doing enough? Was I not the wife Daniel deserved? Looking back, I realize how much her words chipped away at my confidence, how much they shaped the cracks that would later break wide open. It was an ordinary Friday evening, and I was sitting at our kitchen table, sipping tea and flipping through some bills. Daniel was out meeting Gianna, as he often did on Fridays. The TV was on in the background, and I heard the familiar voice announcing the week's lottery numbers. Absent-mindedly, I reached for the ticket I'd bought earlier that week, a spur-of-the-moment purchase I'd made while grabbing groceries. I wasn't expecting much. Lottery tickets were a harmless indulgence for me, something I bought on occasion for the sheer fantasy of winning. But as the numbers rolled across the screen, I felt my heartbeat quicken. One by one, They matched my ticket, the first 3 numbers, then 4, 5, and finally the 6th. I couldn't believe my eyes. I checked and rechecked the ticket, certain I must be mistaken. But there it was, clear as day. I had all the winning numbers. $10 million. My hands trembled, and I had to sit down to steady myself. For a moment, I just stared at the ticket, trying to process what this meant. My life was about to change forever. All the worries about money, all the sacrifices I'd made, it felt like they had been wiped away in an instant. I thought about the possibilities, paying off debts, investing in my future, and finally being able to breathe without the constant weight of financial stress. When Daniel came home that evening, I couldn't keep the news to myself. I told Daniel everything, showing him the winning lottery ticket. At first, his reaction was exactly what I expected. He was ecstatic, hugging me tightly and spinning me around the kitchen. "Isabella, this is incredible," he exclaimed, his eyes wide with excitement. But as the initial shock wore off, his expression shifted from joy to calculation. Without missing a beat, he pulled out his phone and called Gianna. "Mom, you won't believe this," he said. "Isabella won the lottery. $10 million. It wasn't long before Gianna arrived at our apartment, her face alight with excitement. "Isabella," she exclaimed, "this is amazing. Now you can finally move out of this cramped little place and buy a real house, a mansion." I blinked, startled by her boldness. "I haven't even had time to think about it," I said cautiously. "Oh, don't be silly," Gianna said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "There's nothing to think about. You need something grand, something worthy of this kind of money." Daniel nodded in agreement. "She's right, Isabella. This apartment is awful. We could move to Lake Forest or Highland Park. Imagine the life we could have." That word, "we," struck a chord. This money was mine. I had won it. Yet, the way Daniel and Gianna were talking, it was as if it had suddenly become theirs, as though I was merely a vessel for their dreams. "I just need some time to figure things out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But deep down, unease began to stir. I had no idea how far they would go to get what they wanted. Over the next few days, Daniel and Gianna became relentless. They were like a well-coordinated team, planning how to spend the money as though it already belonged to them. Gianna visited almost every day, armed with brochures for luxury mansions and online listings. "Look at this one," she said one evening, shoving her phone in my face. "It's perfect. It has a pool, a guest house, and even a home theater. Imagine the parties we could throw." Her enthusiasm was overwhelming, but what unsettled me more was Daniel's growing obsession. "Isabella," he said one evening, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, "we've never had a chance like this before. We could finally live like we deserve to." I frowned, trying to keep my tone calm. "I don't see why we need a mansion. We can buy a nice house, something practical, and still have money left for savings and investments. I don't want to end up like those lottery winners who lose everything because they overspend." Daniel slammed his coffee mug onto the table, startling me. "Stop being so paranoid. We're not going to lose everything. You need to stop acting like this money is just yours. It's ours." I sat back, shocked by his words. This money was mine. I had bought the ticket, taken the risk. I wasn't saying no to spending it, I just wanted to be cautious. But Daniel and Gianna saw my hesitation as stubbornness, even selfishness. Gianna's remarks became more cutting. "I always knew Isabella wasn't the right match for you," she told Daniel loudly one evening, fully aware I could hear her. "She's small-minded. Daniel deserves someone who supports his dreams, not someone who pinches pennies." The apartment, once my safe haven, now felt like a battleground. I tried reasoning with Daniel privately, but he refused to listen. "You're ruining everything," he said one night after yet another argument. "You've changed, Isabella. This money has turned you into someone I don't even recognize." His words stung. I was the one who had changed. I couldn't believe it. The divide between us grew wider by the day. After one particularly heated argument about the mansion, Daniel's tone turned sharper than I'd ever heard before. "We need to talk," he said, his eyes cold and unreadable. The way he and Gianna exchanged glances made my stomach churn with unease. Reluctantly, I followed them, thinking they might have a plan they wanted to share in private. Instead of taking me somewhere logical, they drove to a remote property on the outskirts of the city, a dingy old storage unit Daniel had access to. The building loomed in the dark, its silence suffocating. As we stepped inside, I was struck by how eerily quiet it was. My unease turned to full-blown panic when I saw what was in the center of the dimly lit room, a large, rusted metal cage. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. But before I could make sense of anything, Daniel and Gianna grabbed my arms. "Let me go!" I shouted, struggling against their grip. My heart pounded as they dragged me toward the cage. "You leave us no choice," Gianna sneered, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "You refuse to listen to reason, so maybe some time in here will change your mind." "Stop this. What are you doing?" I screamed, but my words fell on deaf ears. Daniel opened the cage door, his face void of any emotion. I fought as hard as I could, but they shoved me inside, slamming the heavy door shut behind me. The sound of the padlock clicking into place echoed through the room, each metallic note tightening the knot of fear in my chest. "You'll stay here," Daniel said flatly, "until you agree to do what's best for this family." I gripped the bars, shouting and pleading, but they ignored me. Gianna smirked as she walked away, her voice echoing through the storage unit. "Maybe now you'll finally come to your senses." She turned to leave, her voice dripping with malice. "Think it over, Isabella. We'll check on you later." As their footsteps faded, the cold silence of the room swallowed me whole. My hands trembled as I gripped the bars, trying to steady myself. The reality of my situation hit me like a tidal wave. I was trapped, treated like nothing more than an obstacle to their greedy plans. But I wasn't going to let them win. At first, fear and despair threatened to overwhelm me, but I knew I couldn't sit there waiting for someone to save me. If I wanted to escape, I had to rely on myself. I began inspecting the cage, running my hands along the cold, rusted bars, hoping to find a weakness. After what felt like hours, I found it. One of the hinges on the door was rusted and loose. My heart leapt with hope, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. Wrapping my hands around the hinge, I pulled with all my strength. Pain shot through my fingers as the rust scraped and cut my skin, but I didn't stop. Each tug made the hinge weaker until, finally, with one last effort, it gave way. The door creaked open just enough for me to squeeze through. My arms and legs scraped against the rusted bars as I wriggled out, but the relief of being free overshadowed the pain. I moved cautiously, listening for any sign of Daniel or Gianna returning. The room was silent except for the pounding of my heart. The exit to the storage unit was unlocked, and I pushed the door open carefully. The cool night air hit my face like a blessing, and I ran. I didn't look back. The only thought in my mind was to get as far away from that nightmare as possible. I didn't stop running until my legs burned and my chest heaved with every breath. The streets were quiet, but the silence felt oppressive, as though the shadows might come alive with Daniel or Gianna chasing after me. I had no idea where I was going, all I knew was that I couldn't stop. I couldn't let them find me. Finally, I stumbled across a small diner with a flickering neon sign. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside, my hands shaking. The place was almost empty except for a waitress wiping down the counter and an older man nursing a cup of coffee in the corner. The waitress looked up, her brow furrowing as she took in my disheveled state. "You okay, Han?" she asked gently. My voice cracked. "I just need a minute." She nodded and brought me a glass of water without pressing further. I sat in the farthest booth, trying to catch my breath, my mind racing as I replayed everything that had happened. How could they have done this to me? My own husband and his mother, people I had trusted. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me flinch. When I pulled it out, Daniel's name flashed on the screen. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I quickly silenced the call. There were several missed calls and text messages, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. Shoving the phone back into my pocket, I realized I needed help, but who could I trust? Then, an idea came to me. Rose. She had been my best friend in college, though we hadn't spoken in years. Still, if there was anyone who could help me, it was her. With trembling hands, I dialed her number. It rang a few times before I heard her familiar voice. Isabella. Oh my God, it's been forever. How are you? The warmth in her tone made tears spring to my eyes. Rose. I need your help, I choked out. Can I come stay with you? I don't have anywhere else to go. Her voice immediately shifted to concern. Of course. Are you okay? Where are you? I'll come get you. I gave her the address of the diner and sat there, waiting and watching the door nervously, afraid Daniel or Gianna might walk in at any moment. Every passing second felt like an eternity. When Rose's old sedan finally pulled up outside, relief washed over me. She hurried inside, and as soon as she saw me, she wrapped me in a tight hug. Isabella, what happened? You look. She stopped herself, shaking her head. Never mind. Let's get you out of here. The drive to Rose's small house on the outskirts of the city was quiet. She didn't press me for details, letting me sit in silence as I tried to collect myself. When we arrived, she led me into her cozy guest room. Take your time. Whenever you're ready, I'm here, she said gently. I collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with me. For the first time in hours, I felt safe. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Daniel and Gianna had tried to break me, but they hadn't succeeded. I was free now, and I wasn't going to let them get away with what they'd done. That night, as I drifted off to sleep, one thought consumed me: I had escaped, but this wasn't over. Justice would be mine. The next morning, sunlight poured through the guest room window, casting a warm glow over the space. For a moment, I let myself feel safe. But as I sat up, memories of the night before came rushing back. My relief quickly turned into determination. Over breakfast, I told Rose everything: the lottery win, their growing greed, the cage, and my escape. Her face shifted from shock to anger. Isabella, this is beyond cruel. What they did is illegal, she said, her voice firm. And in that moment, I knew I wouldn't let them win. You have to go to the police, Rose urged. I know, I said, my voice trembling. But what if they deny it? What if no one believes me? Rose reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're not doing this alone. We'll make sure they can't lie their way out of this. With Rose's support, I began piecing together all the evidence I could. We took photos of my bruised hands and scraped arms, clear proof of my struggle to escape the cage. I scrolled through my phone and found several incriminating text messages from Gianna and Daniel. One from Gianna read, "Stop being stubborn, Isabella. You'll regret it if you don't cooperate." Next, Rose helped me contact a lawyer she knew, Clara Mitchell, a sharp and empathetic attorney. That afternoon, I met with Clara and recounted everything in painstaking detail. She listened carefully, her expression darkening as I spoke. This is coercion, unlawful imprisonment, and assault, she said firmly. With the evidence you have, we can build a solid case. Clara guided me through filing a police report. I handed over the photos, text messages, and detailed notes of the events. To my surprise, the officers took my story seriously. The extent of Daniel and Gianna's actions, combined with the evidence, made it impossible to dismiss. The investigation began quickly. When the police questioned Daniel and Gianna, they predictably denied everything. But their arrogance worked against them. They contradicted themselves multiple times. When the police inspected the storage unit, they found the rusted cage with its broken hinge, a damning piece of physical evidence. While the legal process unfolded, Clara also helped me secure my lottery winnings. Daniel had already begun scheming to access the money without my consent, but Clara ensured he couldn't touch a single cent. We froze all accounts tied to the winnings and transferred control entirely to me. "You're in charge now," Clara said. "They can't manipulate you anymore." As the trial date approached, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. I knew this wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I had the truth on my side. Rose and Clara reminded me how far I'd come and how important it was to see this through. "This isn't just about you," Rose said one evening. "It's about making sure they can't hurt anyone else." I nodded, my resolve hardening. Daniel and Gianna had tried to break me, but I was still standing. Now it was my turn to fight back. The trial began a month later. As I walked into the courtroom, I felt both nerves and determination. Rose was by my side, offering silent support, while Clara confidently led the case. Daniel and Gianna sat at the defense table, their faces hard and cold, though traces of unease were evident in their expressions. Their lawyer tried to twist the narrative, claiming the cage incident was a misunderstanding and that Daniel and Gianna had no ill intentions. But Clara was unfazed. She presented our evidence with precision, the text messages, photos of my injuries, and the findings from the storage unit. When the jury saw the rusted cage with its broken hinge, the gravity of what had happened was undeniable. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and told my story. My voice trembled at first, but I pushed through, recounting everything from their greed over the lottery to the horrifying moment they locked me in the cage. They didn't see me as a person anymore, I told the courtroom, my voice growing steadier. To them, I was just a means to get what they wanted. And when I refused, they tried to silence me. They tried to break me. Daniel and Gianna were called to testify as well, but their arrogance became their downfall. Their stories contradicted each other, and their dismissive attitudes only alienated the jury further. Gianna's attempts to downplay her threats came across as cold and calculated, while Daniel's defensiveness made him look even guiltier. After days of testimony, the jury reached a unanimous decision. The judge's voice was steady and clear as he delivered the verdict. The defendants, Daniel and Gianna, are found guilty of unlawful imprisonment, assault, and attempted coercion. He continued, addressing them directly, "Your actions were not only cruel but a gross violation of trust. You demonstrated a clear disregard for the safety and autonomy of the victim. This court sentences each of you to 5 years in prison and a $50,000 fine to compensate the victim for the physical and emotional harm you caused." As the bailiffs placed handcuffs on Daniel and Gianna, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Justice had been served. The people who had tried to strip me of my freedom and dignity were finally being held accountable. In the weeks following the trial, I focused on rebuilding my life. With Clara's help, I finalized the protection of my lottery winnings, ensuring my financial independence. I moved to a small, peaceful house far from the city, a place where I could start fresh, free from the shadows of my past. I also decided to use a portion of my winnings to help others, donating to organizations supporting survivors of abuse. Knowing that my experience could make a difference in someone else's life gave me a sense of purpose. Rose remained by my side through it all, her friendship a constant reminder that not everyone in the world is out to hurt you. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my new home watching the sunset, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The memories of what Daniel and Gianna had done still lingered, but they no longer controlled me. Instead, they served as a reminder of my strength, of what I had endured and overcome. Their greed had almost destroyed me, but I had fought back and reclaimed my life. For the first time in months, I felt at peace, ready to embrace the future and leave the pain behind.